An outspoken champion for human rights and the environment, Ben Cardin has been a national leader on foreign policy while representing the people of Maryland in the United States Senate, and before that, the House of Representatives. He has worked across party lines to further U.S. national security and to ensure that anti corruption and respect for civil and human rights are integrated into American actions at home and abroad. Currently serving as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Cardin also serves on the United States Holocaust Memorial Council and is the special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Senator Cardin was at the forefront of efforts to develop and implement a national U.S. strategy against anti-Semitism and hate-based violence. He has consistently worked to raise awareness of the escalation of global anti-Semitic violence and other forms of intolerance while striving to promote peace, tolerance, and equality. Joining Senator Cardin today is Moment Book and Opinion Editor Amy E. Schwartz. Please welcome Senator Cardin and Amy E. Schwartz.
Senator, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to give us some time. I know you're very busy, and I thought you must be particularly busy right now. Have you found that even after 18 years in the Senate, in these last few months, before you wrap it up, you have a million things you meant to do?
Well, Amy, first of all, it's good to be with you. Absolutely. First of all, just winding up a 58-year career of elected office, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in transition. And there are people that you care about, you want to make sure they're taken care of. So there's a lot that I need to do in closing my Senate office. But in addition to that, world events have put a lot of attention on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that I chair. So I've done some traveling as a result of that and a lot of conversations in an effort to try to be helpful. The problems do not taper off. They seem to mushroom, and it's my responsibility as chair of the committee to do everything I can to try to be as constructive as we can be.
I guess world problems don't care about Senate schedules or changes of, end of term or anything like that.
No, not at all. And quite frankly, I intended to stay very actively engaged in my Senate responsibilities until January 3rd at noon. We still have local issues concerning the Francis Scott Key Bridge. We have to get funded. I have the Chesapeake Bay program. We have a major legislation in regards to the National Defense Authorization Act. So there's a lot going on, the budgets and a lot of the issues in the budgets that affect the state of Maryland. So my responsibilities as a senator, my responsibilities as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, all that requires my attention all the way through January 3rd.
And those are local issues, but what about the big international issues is there anything you can, I mean, you can't wrap them up, but is there anything particular you're doing in the next couple of months?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to maintain that type of support in this country for Ukraine and for the United States to work with our allies to make it clear to Russia that they will not win this war, that Ukraine's going to win the war. The problems in the Middle East has been extremely frustrating. I've worked across party line to try to get a path forward for peace in the Middle East. We recognize Israel's need to defend itself, not only against Hamas and Hezbollah, but also against Iran and its proxies and the Houthis in the Red Sea. All those issues have meant a lot of conversations with leaders in the region and with my colleagues in government to try to find a path forward.
Mm-hmm. So this is, as you said before, as you mentioned before, this is not just 18 years in the Senate. You've been in elected office. You said 56 years, basically 58
years.
years. You were elected to Maryland state government when you were in law school, right? So this is first the Maryland state, then the House of Representatives, then the Senate. So this is sort of a policy wonky question or government wonk, and I promise it'll be the only one. But I would think, you're one of the few people in the Senate that I can really ask about sort of the skills of governing and of lawmaking that you develop over a long period of time. I mean, it takes skills, right? It's not just charisma and you come in and do it with, you have a vision. Are there things that you want your younger colleagues that you wish they knew more about, like how to do this job?
I would first recommend more civility in our political system. Talk to people. We develop, I think, stronger and more lasting solutions to problems when we work together to try to find a common path forward. So I started in the Maryland legislature when I was a law student between my second and third year of law school. And I made friends with people who had different views. I rose to become chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and later Speaker of the House. I was able to do that because I was able to bring conservative and progressive members together to try to solve problems. We didn't have so much of a party difference in Annapolis. The Democrats had the overwhelming majority of seats in the General Assembly, but there was a deep division between rural Maryland and urban Maryland. And I was able to bring people with different views together to solve some common problems of public safety or our environment or our healthcare system. And so I find that if you can sit down and talk to people, put them into the room so they are part of the solution, you can get things done. And not only that, you're able to get bills and policies that will stand the test of time.
Do you feel like the Senate can still do those things?
Oh, absolutely. I've worked across party line. I've worked with Republicans my entire career in the United States Senate. We've gotten some major bills accomplished in pension reform, in human rights globally, in the environmental areas, and healthcare. The list goes on and on. There are policies now of this country because I was able to work with a Republican and listen, make some compromises, but find a way to get bills enacted into law.
Mhm. So, was that typical, by the way, to come into the legislature at 22? Does everyone start that young?
I don't know if I recommend that course of action. I had an opportunity to run for the General Assembly. Uh, my family was active in politics, so it was a good last name to run in 1966. I was able to win a seat in a multi-member district in the Maryland General Assembly. Um, but I was not yet a lawyer. I became a lawyer about a year and a half later. I enjoyed the practice of law. I believe you really should try to establish yourself in your career before running for public office, but you have to take advantage when you have opportunities.
Right. Did you ever read that your grandfather was in the legislature?
My father
Your father.
and my uncle were both in the
Yeah.
General Assembly.
So,
My
yeah.
father, before he was married, was in the General Assembly.
So in your family, it's a tradition to start out, when you're just a sprout in the government.
Well, no, my father didn't start quite as early as I did, but he started young. And yes, we do start young in politics. So we're all involved in politics. Not all of us run for office, but we all get involved in some form of politics, whether you're a journalist or whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a school teacher, there's politics.
Well, I've heard you say that in this case too, when you're leaving the Senate but you're not retiring, you're going to continue to be active in politics, or is that
Yes.
right?
Oh, absolutely. The decision I had to make was actually an 8-year decision, 2 years before the election and for a 6-year term. And I felt that it was the right time for me to look for other ways that I can pursue my passion, what I believe in. So whether it's international human rights, the support for Israel and trying to find peace in the Middle East, or whether it is the environment in the Chesapeake Bay, I'm going to find ways that I can contribute. My family has always been actively engaged in our community, and I plan to stay actively engaged in our community.
Well, you mentioned Israel, and that's a great segue because obviously we wanted to ask you about your very long and deep involvement with support for Israel. Um, um, can you just to start out, can you tell me can you talk a little bit about how your Jewish values inform
Sure.
the work of governing? Um, their
You
particular
need to
values?
know. You need to know. I grew up in a Jewish community. Um, my entire neighborhood, I believe, was Jewish. My synagogue was in my community. Our school, which was a public school, had 99.9% Jewish enrollment. So when the
Where's
high
that?
holidays
Baltimore?
occurred, even though the schools weren't closed, there was no one in the classroom. So it was a very safe environment to grow up in. But uh, my Jewish background, my Jewish traditions were instilled upon me. We to this day still have Friday night dinners together, Shabbat dinners as a family. We always sit around the dinner table, could be as many as 20, 30 people, and we talk. And we talk about values. So Tikkun Olam was talked about frequently when I was very young, about our responsibility to help. But it was not just the language in my family, it's what my family did. My mother was involved in so many different charitable ventures. My father was extremely active in so many different nonprofit groups. So Tikkun Olam and Tzedakah were part of my family. We always put money in the pushka, for not only for Jewish National Fund, but for people who needed help. So it was something that was the values that I was taught and saw and wanted to pursue. So it's always been my North Star, and that is trying to make this world better, take care of people who need help, and to use opportunities that I have to advance those causes.
So how do you turn that outward I mean, when you're working as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for instance, are there times when you're shaped by when you feel like how you were shaped affects your decision making?
Oh, absolutely. I start from my first day in the Maryland General Assembly when my first year attended a community meeting that they had a complaint. There was a Little League team that couldn't play in our community because there was no ball field that was safe for them to play at. Yet a new high school was just constructed with a beautiful playing field, just didn't have a fence around it. So here I am, a freshman member of the General Assembly, and I decided to call the mayor of Baltimore. Lo and behold, he picked up the phone, and 2 weeks later, there was a fence there. It just taught me that you can use that power, but use it properly. So now, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I have the attention of world leaders. So how I use that to advance human rights, how I use that to advance American values, how I use that to promote peace in the region, and to help Israel, which has been so isolated globally, to be able to be better represented in international forums.
Are there times when you've picked up the phone? Can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. I do that frequently. Phone calls are a tool that's in my toolkit to use. I talk to ambassadors. I talk to foreign ministers. I talk to heads of state on a regular basis by phone, by email, and in personal visits. When world leaders come to Washington, normally I have a chance to meet with them. It gives me a chance to try to not only download the information that they have, but to give them our views as to how we think it's best to frame foreign policy. So yes, I have that opportunity on a regular basis. I've used it to promote our values.
Are there any examples you can share with us, like a phone call you made to a leader that really you felt like they heard you?
Well, King Abdullah of Jordan is a frequent communicator, so we talk on a regular basis. I've had many conversations with the ambassador of Israel, many conversations with the ambassador from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from UAE. They call, we talk. It's current events. They want to get input on how I feel about things occurring. There's been some very interesting visits I've made to foreign leaders, including the leader of Saudi Arabia, and had a rather frank discussion with him in regards to his past conduct, but also in regards to the role that they can play in peace in the Middle East. So yes, I've had those opportunities, and it's something that I know I will miss. I'm there asked, am I going to miss things in the United States Senate? I've talked to some of my former colleagues. I'm going to certainly miss being at the table and being able to talk to world leaders. But I really cherish the opportunities that I've had. I've tried to take advantage of every one of those opportunities. And I think as a result, there's been some really positive developments that have taken place because of those engagements.
Is there an example, something you're particularly proud of that came from a personal interaction?
Well, yes, several of the events in several countries have led to people being released from custody. I've taken on individual cases. Just recently, I had a chance to visit with Kara Mursa, who was imprisoned in Russia, and I did a lot of personal plea to make sure that not only Russia knew how important it was, and that spotlight would remain, as I did, by the way, on the tragic loss of Sergei Magnitsky with the Magnitsky sanctions. I can put a spotlight on an issue. And sometimes world leaders don't want that spotlight to remain, so they can take action to help, but also with our own government to make sure it was a top priority. So yes, I take great pride in many people who are now home with their families that were imprisoned. as a result of efforts that I made to put a spotlight on those cases. So yes, we could do that. I can go back, of course, to the days of the refuseniks when I first started with the Soviet Jews leaving the Soviet Union. My cousin Shoshana Cardin was the president of the National Committee for Soviet Jews, and my wife Myrna was the head of the Maryland Committee for Soviet Jews when I was elected to the House of Representatives. So I had to report home every night what I was doing to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union. And I did. I traveled to Russia. I traveled to Europe behind the Iron Curtain to plea on behalf of those that were being persecuted. And as a result, many we got positive results. So yes, I give you many examples of people that I believe my efforts helped, along with others, to advance their human rights causes. But it goes beyond that. It goes to trying to find ways to bring nations and people together. I've traveled to many troubled spots of the world. I've traveled to Turkey and Greece, trying to improve the relationship between those two countries. I've been in Cyprus, trying to deal with challenges in Cyprus. I just recently came back from Armenia, trying to deal with the issues of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So, yes, I do think these visits are important, and I do think I've made progress as a result of my activities.
Those are really all the long running favorite issues. The impossible subject, Cyprus, Armenia. Wow. Um, so you mentioned bringing home captives, and I guess we should segue into the sadder part of this conversation, which is I know you've been very active in working with hostage families and generally, with Israel during the course of this war. Can you tell us what that's been like?
A year ago, I was in Israel shortly after the October 7th attack. I met with the families of the hostages. I made a commitment at that point that I would do everything I could every day to bring the hostages home. We have to recognize they never should have been taken by Hamas. They should be released immediately without conditions. And the world should focus on Hamas and demand that the hostages be released. So yes, I have called upon that. I've introduced bills that deal with it. I've had press conferences with the hostage families. I've raised it at international meetings, and I have raised it in meetings that I've had with the leaders of Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. All those countries have been helpful in trying to get the hostages released. So yes, it is outrageous that they're being held today, and they never should have been taken. And I'm disappointed that the world does not focus on Hamas. They're the reasons these hostages were taken. There's no reason for holding these hostages. They should be immediately released.
Mhm. Yeah, those meetings must be very difficult with the families.
They're extremely difficult. I mean, it just rips you up, and you can't imagine what they've gone through. And of course, several have ended with real tragedies, with even the execution of some of the hostages recently, as we saw. And the brutality here, it's hard for us to understand how people can be like this. How can you live in a civilized world and do what they did and to continue to do what they're doing? So, yes, it's hard for us to understand this, but we have to confront it. One of the lessons that we've learned over our history as Jews is that you can't just let these things ever become normalized. The rise of anti-Semitism, it's dangerous today, including in the United States. And we always need to put a spotlight on it. We can't say, well, things will get better. We got to make sure things get better by giving no oxygen for hate. And we always have to leaders have to lead on this and make it clear this will not be acceptable. We will not normalize this, and we'll have no place in our community for these types of behavior.
How do you do that? I mean, from where you sit, like what kind of things do you do to avoid normalizing?
Well, the first thing you do is have a strategy, and I applaud the Biden administration and Doug Emhoff's work that he's done. That we have a national strategy to fight anti-Semitism. It's all hands on deck, all agencies and private sector working together. We not only adopted it here, and I'll go into some of the specifics. It deals with Holocaust education. It deals with security. As you know, we have these nonprofit security grants that help targets become more immune to the vulnerability of attacks. It involves coalition building, recognizing that you can't do this alone. If any group is vulnerable, we're all vulnerable. It requires leadership. You never sit out an episode like this. You always make it clear that this is unacceptable and stand up for the vulnerable people that have been marginalized because of violence. And that requires leadership. I participated in the Berlin Conference over 2 decades ago, where we was the first international conference really for a strategy against anti-Semitism. And then just recently, I was in Buenos Aires as we commemorated the 30th anniversary of the EMEA tragedy, the Jewish community tragedy. And I was so proud that the United States led an effort that was joined by over 30 nations to develop a commitment, a country-specific commitment for a strategy to fight anti-Semitism. So it's all of the above you need to do. So you never normalize this. You always speak out against any form of hate, any form of anti-Semitism.
All of the above is kind of an all hands on deck kind of a never. I mean,
Absolutely, because you see today in our community, elected officials saying things that are traditional tropes. You've got to speak out against that. When you challenge the loyalty of Jewish Americans to the United States, or you say that Jews are responsible for certain activities and characterize all Jews, or you characterize Israel as Jewish, and everybody that does anything there is just cries out for people to act down anti-Semitism, and that needs to be countered. And it's one thing for a Jewish senator to say it. It's another thing for a non-Jewish senator to say something. So, and it's something about a Jewish senator talking about Islamophobia or talking about gender violence. And we all have to be engaged in all forms of hate because they're all related.
is that something you've done? Have you spoken out on Islamophobia as well?
Oh, absolutely. I've not only spoken out, I've had legislation to deal with that. I was the representative for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's this parliamentary assembly on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. And we talked about police violence here in the United States targeted against African Americans. That was one of our major thrusts. We also talked about the rise of Islamophobia in the work that I did as a special representative. So yes, I talk about all forms of intolerance against the LGBTQ community. Any form of hatred or violence on a discriminatory basis needs to be called out, and all leaders need to be calling it out, not just elected officials. Academic leaders, educators need to call it out. The medical community needs to call it out. The organized labor needs to call it out. It has to be called out by all leaders because they have audiences, and they can reach those audiences a lot better than perhaps I can.
That's interesting. So have you been spending time on college campuses? What do you think about what's going on there?
I have spent a lot of time on college campuses, and I've met with groups, and I applaud some of our leaders on college campuses for speaking out against all forms of hate. But you got to be clear. You cannot allow activities to take place on college campuses that make it unsafe or uncomfortable for Jewish students to be able to participate in their activities on campus. And we've had leaders on college campuses that have not protected the rights of Jewish students. So I've called that out, absolutely. But we've had circumstances where we've seen coalitions starting to form to say, we want to protect everyone's rights.
So is there a place that's doing that particularly well? I mean that's good news that there's somebody who's doing a model thing.
Well, I've been particularly focused on Maryland college campuses, and yes, I think there's been some really good examples of leadership that we've had that have dealt with these issues directly. And the University System of Maryland have been particularly strong, I think, in trying to deal with this. But there have been moments that I've found that there have been problems, and you got to speak out about it. You can't say, well, they've been good 90% of the time and not talk about the other 10%. Yes, you can acknowledge what they've done that's right, but also make it clear where they have failed. You need to put a spotlight on it. You can't ever say, well, that's okay, because it's not okay.
Anything you've seen that really shocked you?
Well, yes, I must tell you, I've lived in a very comfortable community all my life and never felt threatened. And today I feel threatened, not as a personal person, but as a Jew. I feel that it's not as safe as I want it to be. So yes, I am somewhat shocked that people don't want to wear an emblem that shows that they're Jewish, or afraid to wear their kippah. I mean, to me, that's really shocking. Look, I grew up and went to Europe and saw police in front of synagogues and said, well, gee, in the United States, we don't have that concern. Well, guess what? We do today. And now
Yeah.
the police are in front of our synagogues. So the reality of what has happened, and I was not alive during the 1930s, but I wonder whether some of the things we're seeing today remind us of what happened in the 1930s in Europe. And one of my great concerns is that we have not taught history. And so many of our young people don't understand what happened in Europe in the 1930s. They don't understand the history of the Middle East. They don't understand the history of our own country. So we need to do a better job to explain history so people recognize when things are occurring, they can lead to disastrous consequences. What Russia is doing in Ukraine could lead to a disastrous type of a world war that we never want to see again.
Hmm. Yeah, you were on the board, or you were, or you are on the board of the Holocaust Museum, right? So you must have a lot of hands-on, a lot of sense of how to do that kind of education hands-on.
The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is a wonderful institution. I know people know it from visiting it and seeing the exhibits of the Holocaust itself, but it's also a research institution and an institution that's committed to promote tolerance around the world. And it is one of the great resource centers that we have to fight all forms of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred. And it is visited by a lot of visitors around the world. A lot of military are trained to understand what's happened in history through the Holocaust Memorial Museum. So we're very proud of that institution.
Those students, was it at Columbia, who were shouting, I mean, go back to Poland? How many things would you have to not know to say that? I was just stunned to read about those.
It is just so disappointing to see young people who obviously do not know what they're saying. At least you hope they don't know what they're saying, but in ignorance of history, because I would like to believe that people are better than that. Now I know what happened with Hamas, that people are in many cases not better than that. But I know there's a lot of people that are wrapped up in these protests that are better than what they're saying. And I wish they would become more understanding of history and more understanding of the risk factors and the type of activities that they could encourage by their language.
Mhm. So, as a practical matter, I mean, you say you have to call out everything, and you say the president's pro strategy on anti-Semitism has things going on at every level. So, how would that work as a practical matter? Would someone have to reach out to Columbia, or I mean, what's the nitty-gritty of this kind of um,
Well, as part of the president's strategies, all agencies are involved. So we have the Department of Education that is reaching out to our college campuses. I serve on several college boards. I'm on the University of Maryland Law School Visitors Board, and we had a session dealing with what is appropriate and what is not appropriate as far as protests on campus. Um, I serve on the Naval Academy Board of Visitors. They don't have that issue, that problem, because it's a military type of environment. But we had a conversation about it at the military academy, and they said, yes, we have discussions that take place, and we encourage a frank exchange, but mindful of what you're saying, and the words have consequences. And so, yes, we expect that through the federal program, we will have resources available to try to help college students understand their responsibilities. We want them to have passionate views about world peace and about the rights of all people. But we wanted them to understand that you got to do it with a knowledge of history and a respect for your fellow students.
mhm. Well, that kind of leads to, I won't go on and on about just anti-Semitism, but I do have one last question. You kind of alluded to it when you said, you have to be mindful of what you say in these conversations. Do you think there's anything left of sort of the general taboo in America against anti-Semitism?
It's a great question. Words have consequences. There's no question about it. But when you see the type of language that is used in mainstream campaigning in this country, or you see the type of language that's been mainstreamed at meetings and groups and on our campuses, you start to wonder whether we are ready to accept that. As I said earlier, you cannot accept that because that would be normalizing giving oxygen to hate. You never want to normalize that. I think particularly you want to call out when a leader gives oxygen to hate. And that is something that we need. That's where leaders have to come forward. And I said, not just senators and presidents, but as I said earlier, if you're a head of the PTA in your community, you're a leader. You've got to speak out against that type of behavior because it can lead to violence, and it can certainly lead to a community that is not as accepting as we all want to live in. So we all have that responsibility to always speak out against any form of hate.
Mhm. So let's take a step back and let me ask you one question about Israel. I mean, it's a big question. Now that Sinwar is gone, what do you see happening? Do you see an end game here?
Well, we have to recognize that the Israelis have been living under the threat of terrorism for now decades, and the citizens of Israel that live in northern Israel no longer were able to live there because of the constant rockets coming in from Hezbollah and attacks. What happened in Gaza was just something that hit Israel so hard. Everybody in Israel was impacted by it. That there is no future stability and security in Israel unless they can contain the terrorist threats. So they're motivated to try to take out militarily the threat from Iran and its proxies, whether it's again Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. They're prepared to do that. But ultimately, the security of Israel cannot be just guaranteed through its military. Its military is the best in the region. So there is a real opportunity if we can get more normal relations with the countries in the region with Israel. And we saw how that can operate. Iran attacked Israel in April and just a couple of weeks ago attacked Israel. And Israel successfully defended against those attacks. How they do that? Through their military ability, with the help of the United States, and with the help of their Arab neighbors. They were able to successfully defend themselves. Iran is the threat in the region, not Israel, to the Arab states. So whether you're talking about the Abraham Accord countries of Jordan, Egypt, or UAE, or you're talking about Saudi Arabia or Qatar, they all recognize that a regional security pact with Israel and the United States against Iran is their best ticket, not only to security, but to economic growth and opportunity. So as we look at a day after, there needs to be a day after this conflict. We look at normalization between Israel and its neighbors, particularly the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and regional security understandings or pacts that defend against Iran and its proxies so that you isolate Iran in the region. And if you do that, then I think the future will be very bright for Israel and the Palestinians living side by side in peace. There's game plans for responsible leadership for the Palestinians that recognize Israel's security needs and recognizes that by doing this, we can have stronger economic prosperity for all the people in the region. So that's what we're working towards. We were working towards that prior to October 7th. That's one of the reasons why Hamas picked that opportunity to attack Israel, to try to derail that. We can't let Hamas win on the battlefield, and we can't let them win in denying us an opportunity for peace in the region.
Mhm. If you had Netanyahu's ear, which for all I know you may, what would you put, what direction would you be nudging him at this point?
I think I would be telling the prime minister, take your military victories and turn them into political victories. For too long, Israel's always been isolated. But right now, I think you have an opportunity to take the military victories against the terrorist organizations and turn it into a political victory where the people of Lebanon or the people of Gaza, the people in the West Bank can all live in peace with security if we can just isolate Iran. And you now have the opportunity and attention of so many of the powers in the region, and they saw how it operated when Iran attacked Israel. So I think I would tell him, convert the military victories into political victories. Let's move forward with peace in the region, recognizing the Palestinians have a right to self-determination, their own state. Israel has the right to make sure that it's secure against future terrorist organizations operating anywhere in the region. And that can be done through these regional security arrangements.
So you're still thinking two-state solution, right?
There is no other option, two states. The Palestinians are entitled to self-determination, but Israel's entitled to security. So it cannot operate the way it's done in the past. You need to have governance among the Palestinians that recognizes Israel's security needs. And that's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. But that's the way you get investments into the Palestinian areas, particularly through the UAE and Saudi Arabia, that can give an economic future, which is what everybody wants. So yes, it is two states living side by side in peace, without any roots for terrorists to be able to get a grip in the region.
Is it harder to get there now with the state of mind Israelis are in? There's, after all this.
There's always been challenges, and the challenges today are great. But I believe what Israelis want is security. And I think what the Palestinians want is security and economic prosperity. So I think there's a way forward. Hamas victimized Israel, but they also victimized the Palestinian people. There's no future for the Palestinian people with Hamas or any terrorist group. I think they understand that. So there's a common path forward between people who want to live in peace and security. We just have to find a way to get there. And we recognize that there really is no other solution here than for us to get these regional compacts to isolate Iran so that you can really have Palestinians and Israelis living side by side in peace.
Okay, let me take you home for the last 5 minutes. I know you have to stop at a hard time, at a specific time. So you hear people say on every side that the Jewish community that right now is politically more polarized than it's ever been, that things are changing in the community itself. Do you think Jews will still vote overwhelmingly for Democrats in this election, or where do you see this going?
I don't see Jews as polarized as I see some of our leaders trying to polarize the Jewish community. And to me, that's unacceptable. One of the things I will not tolerate is those who try to make Israel a wedge political issue. We need the support of Democrats. We need the support of Republicans. We need the support of independents. We need the support of Congress. We need the support of the White House that recognize the special relationship between Israel and the United States. It started in 1948 when Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel, recognized it was a democratic state. We share common values. And now it's militarily important to us for intelligence information. And this goes on and on and on that recognize that. That's recognized by mainstream Democrats and mainstream Republicans alike. There's been no challenge, basically, to the strong partnership, the military equipment being made available to Israel that it needs to defend itself. The foreign assistance has been made available. The development of technology, including the Iron Dome, David Sling, and all the other, the tunneling intelligence information, and all that's been made available through cooperation between Israel and the United States. That is strongly supported by both Democrats and Republicans. So where's the challenge? Because we have Republicans and Democrats that say we can make this into a political issue to the advantage of our political party at the cost of Israel. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll get a little bit partisan on behalf of the Democrats for one moment, but what the Republicans tried to do with the aid to Israel and the supplemental was extremely partisan. Israel didn't even want us to do that. But
you mean the accusation that Democrats were withholding stuff?
Yeah, well, the fact that they try to put it together with an IRS thing and just to have a show me vote. Same thing they did with the ICC legislation. They try to make that into a partisan issue rather than getting something done in regards to the outrageous conduct of the ICC, not respecting Israel's system of justice as being the right venue for any challenges as to how they've conducted this war. So
That's the
all
International Criminal Court, the
yeah,
ICC. Yeah.
and we have strong bipartisan support for that, but the Republicans won't let us have those votes. And quite frankly, the Democrats have not been as clear about not politicizing Israel as I would like to see. So both parties have something at fault here. I think the Republicans have been weaponizing Israel for a much longer time, and it has a price. And that's something that is just wrong. I know my colleagues. I know where the votes are. We've never had a close vote on fundamental support for Israel since I've been in public life. So that's so I think that to say there's a sharp difference, I disagree with. Now, does that mean that there won't be Jews that vote for Republicans, even though historically Jews have voted much more for Democrats? No, I think we're getting we're a much more diverse population, different issues. So there might be economic issues that control a vote rather than the state of Israel. I doubt whether the state of Israel and the support of the U.S. for Israel is the only issue that affects Jewish voters on both Democrats and Republicans. I can tell you this: I've been a strong supporter of Israel, and yet I don't get 100% of the Democratic, 100% of the Jewish vote. I'd like to get 100% of the Jewish vote. Try to get 100% of the Jewish vote. I know that have Jews come up to me and say they're not voting for me, and not sure it's Israel. It may well be the reproductive rights, or it might be economic issues that they disagree with what I stand for. So that's all right. That's okay. But I think that as far as the support for Israel, we want to make sure that there's plenty of room for continuing the bipartisan support for Israel in our political system. And we should condemn anyone who tries to make it into a wedge political issue. One last point on this. I have a reputation that I would only want to sponsor bills that are bipartisan that affect Israel, not to put out a partisan bill. And you look today, and so many of the bills that have been filed in Congress have only Republican or Democratic co-sponsors. That's sponsored. That's wrong. We should be working together to get this done. And I've done that throughout my political career. I've reached out to Republicans working Lindsey Graham. I don't always agree with Lindsey Graham on a lot of issues, but we've worked together on Israel. That's the way it should be. And I think I speak for the overwhelming majority of members of Congress who would like to see it.
Okay. And that's a rousing note on which to finish. And I just want to thank you for this lovely conversation, giving us this much time. And I'm sure even though you don't have an election of your own, you're probably pretty busy these next 2 weeks. Are you?
Amy, thanks for the conversation. Yes, in fact, I'm going out in a little bit to do some more campaigning. We have a competitive Senate race. I'm working very hard for Angela Ossobrooks for her election to fill my seat in the United States Senate. Working very hard on Kamala Harris to be our next president of the United States. I was in Pennsylvania with the Jewish community there on a couple of occasions, talking about.
Place is saturated.
It is. It's pretty crowded. So yes, I'll be busy throughout until the elections, and then after the elections, back to Washington for the lame duck session. A lot of work there before January the 3rd at noon, when my term ends as United States Senator.
Well, that'll be the end of an era for sure, and for all of us too. So thank you so much. Have a
Good
good one.
talking to you. Thank you.
Good luck with everything.